Did you want to weigh in on this, Mr. Welch?
The statute says may. If in fact you decide, and as a board policy, I mean, that's something that you folks have to make up. You have to promulgate that. If you promulgate that, then what you're doing is you're saying to us, okay, XYZ department, next week you're going to be in the red. Stop spending money. There's no payroll. There's no nothing until the Board of Selectmen approves a transfer from somewhere. The problem is that in order to do a transfer, you must determine that the money you're transferring is no longer needed for the purpose for which it was appropriated. That's the level of test that you have to get to. Now, the town has never done that. Yes, you can do it. There's no question about that fact at all. You certainly can do it. But what you do is you tie everybody's hands, because once you make that determination, it doesn't matter what the emergency is or what's going on in the department. If something happens and you're going to overexpend, it gets shut down until the board approves it. And that's where you go with that sort of thing. So it's a dangerous thing to do. Now, at the end of the year, you cannot overexpend the bottom line of the budget. DRA recognizes either process. You can, as long as you don't overexpend the budget, you can deficit spend within line items as long as the bottom line item is not deficit spent. If it is, there's a provision in the statute that says you must appropriate the deficit in the following year as part of the annual budget appropriation. And we're not going there, because I don't believe we can overexpend the budget. I'm a lot stricter than DRA is in that, because I read the statute the way it's written. Mm-hmm. Transfers are something within your authority. If you decide that we're going to transfer before we overexpend any line item, we'll do that. But you have to understand that if you refuse to transfer, that line item gets shut down, and so does that department. That's the caveat that goes with that trigger. And that's something that we've never done. And the town has never transferred, at least in the time I've been here or the records I've seen prior to my coming, those sums to even out, so you have every line item as a non-negative figure. That's a negative comment, I guess.
Additionally, if you're going to be moving budgeted, then you've basically changed the budget. In theory, if you change during the year your budget to cover pluses and minuses, then that would affect the budgeting sequence that you've gotten, you're into in regards to where you're going with 2013. Okay. It's just changing numbers to settle it out.
3210 states for a specific purpose, and it goes on to define the definition of a specific purpose in 32.3. In 32.3, it indicates a line on the budget form posted with the warrant. I've been a selectman for 5 years as far as closing out the year, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have never reflected a negative spending, overspending, on the level of a line on the warrant. The police department has never spent more than the combination of their budget and their previous years' encumbrances going forward. The DPW and so on and so forth. I'm not talking about sublines. I'm talking about a whole department here. And I agree with your point that the $100,000 in DPW makes up the vast majority, 100 of 122. Let me get to my final point, and I'll go back to that one. Just so I understand the impact on the UFB, and that was discussed somewhat when Ben was talking, so I think that we're in sync. On the expense side, we spent all but $38,356, correct?
No, we spent $24,290 against the budget is $24,520. Once again, we're playing with the encumbrances.
Plus, minus, minus.
But we haven't. That's what's available. It's not what we spent. And if nothing happened tonight, everything just flew this way, what would happen is that you would find that your $24 million is what you'd show is expended in 2013. Then
in 2012.
2012. I'm confused already. What you would then see is that in your fund balances, you have, from prior year, you have $324,000 for encumbrances. That number would be increased to $521,000 at the end of 12. If you increase that number from 3 to 5, the 2 has to come from somewhere, and that's going to come from the designated fund balance, or whatever we're calling it today. But it's not an expenditure, it's a change in the fund balance,
Okay,
accounting for the encumbrances.
okay. So, on the expense side, as
Mhm.
opposed to the revenue side,
Yep.
in terms of the impact on the undesignated fund balance, how much money are we adding to that?
You would add the difference between 24.2 and 24.5. So you'd be adding $210,000.
Okay. And that's the
Then-
total add on the expense side.
That would add, but I'm going to subtract it if I change the encumbrances.
Okay,
So you get basically your zero
okay. And the difference in the encumbrances is 200,000, which leads you to zero.
to the number.
So we're basically adding about $10,000 on the expense side.
Yes.
On the revenue side, you backed out the capital, which I forget the amount of that, but it was like 800,000 or
Yes.
whatever. And I fully understand that, to come up with a revenue number of 6.774 million. And if I have it correctly, you used 6.345 million in the setting of the tax rate with DRA.
Yeah.
So therefore, on the revenue side, you would add the difference of those two, which is roughly about 428,000. Okay. So basically, between those two, you're adding about 438,000 to the UFB. Now, how does the 129,000 from the grant play into that?
It doesn't do anything except for if we actually had overexpended, then that's a comparison to the budget. The grant monies is unbudgeted, and the accounting says that if you have grant monies received and grant monies expended, you can increase the budget by that amount of money, which then says that you've actually not expended the $128,000 against the original budget. It would not do anything to the fund balance. You spent the money. It's just a comparison to budget, whether or not you're over or under.
Okay, but the 129,000 in the grant is in the expenditures.
Yes.
Okay, the grant money coming in then is in the revenues?
Yes.
Okay, and that is part of the 6,774?
Yes.
So the reality is then the number is roughly about 438,000?
Yes.
Okay, I understand.